It was Christmas Eve when Officer Nathan Cole stopped his car on a forgotten road outside a quiet mountain town. In the snow lay a German shepherd puppy, so weak she did not cry, did not move, did not even beg. She had food beside her, frozen solid, and eyes that looked like they had waited too long. No one knew who left her there. No one knew why she was still alive. What happened next did not involve sirens or miracles or crowds. It involved one man, one song, and a choice that changed a life forever. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from today. Are you somewhere warm or somewhere cold like this story? Leave a comment and let us know. And if stories about hope, loyalty, and second chances matter to you, please press subscribe and support our channel. Your support helps these stories reach hearts that need them. The road that still remembered. Snow fell slowly over Redwood Hollow on Christmas Eve, the kind of snow that did not arrive with drama, but with decision, as if the sky had been appointed judge and, mercifully, chose to soften everything it touched. The town sat tucked between dark pine ridges and a river that moved beneath a thin lid of ice, steady and secretive like a rumor that refused to die. In the little downtown strip, lampposts wore wreaths and red bows like uniforms for a holiday parade nobody had the energy to attend. And a single star, simple, bright, a bit stubborn, glowed above the church roof as if it were keeping watch for anyone who had forgotten how to hope. The storefront windows offered staged warmth, twinkle lights, paper snowflakes, a plastic Santa that looked like he'd seen too much and decided not to mention it. Yet beyond those lights, beyond the cheerful lie of Main Street, the edges of Redwood Hollow held the places where people went to drop their burdens and pretend they had never carried them. That was where Officer Nathan Cole drove at the end of his shift, alone in a black and white cruiser that smelled faintly of coffee, cold air, and the kind of fatigue that sinks into fabric and refuses to leave. Nathan Cole was 42, tall without trying, built lean in the way a man becomes when he spends more years outside than inside and forgets to sit still long enough for softness to claim him. His hair was dark with a few strands of gray that insisted on showing up like uninvited relatives, and his face carried a calm heaviness, strong jaw, tired eyes the color of winter steel, eyes that had learned to watch without blinking, not because he was fearless, but because blinking sometimes meant missing the moment when something went wrong. He wore a patrol uniform under a thick winter jacket, the badge catching light whenever the dashboard glow shifted, and he had the posture of someone who could look relaxed and still be braced for impact. His temperament was steady, almost quiet, the kind of man who didn't waste words because life had already wasted enough of his. Around other people, Nathan was polite, dryly humorous in a low-key way that could make a stressed-out clerk exhale a laugh without realizing it, but he rarely let anyone close enough to ask what shaped him. The shape came from years of calls that left invisible bruises, and from one private loss that had rearranged his relationship with silence. A mother who used to fill winter nights with humming and piano chords, gone now, leaving a house full of objects that kept her outline, but not her warmth. He didn't talk about that. Redwood Hollow didn't ask. Small towns were good at that. Good at noticing, better at letting things remain unspoken, like snow covering tire tracks before anyone could study where they'd been. His shift had been uneventful in the official way. No accidents, no domestic calls that required paperwork thick as a sermon, just the usual Christmas week oddities. A neighbor complaining about lights too bright and too joyful. An elderly man waving as if Nathan were Santa's deputy. A teenager practicing donuts in an empty lot until the cruiser appeared and the teen pretended to be driving perfectly straight. Nathan tolerated it all with the same patient resignation. Christmas did that. It turned people into children again, for better or worse. The heater in the cruiser worked in stubborn bursts, blowing warm air that arrived late and left early, and Nathan's gloved hands held the steering wheel with the gentle pressure of habit. He turned onto the North Service Road, a narrow stretch that ran behind the industrial edge of town, where snowbanks leaned like tired shoulders and the pines grew thicker, darker, less decorative. He had driven this road 100 times, maybe more, enough that the curves felt memorized by his bones. It was the road people used when they wanted to get rid of something without facing the mirror afterward. Broken furniture, torn bags, old appliances, and sometimes, Nathan hated this part, animals. The town's dump wasn't far, And neither was the place where some folks decided responsibility could be thrown away like a cracked chair. Nathan told himself he drove it because it was part of the patrol boundary. He knew the truth. He drove it because some small part of him still believed the world could be caught before it fell too far. The snow made everything quieter. It muted the crunch of gravel beneath tires, softened the wind, and erased the sharpness of metal and trash that usually offended the eyes. In the distance, the red taillights of a truck vanished into a bend like embers swallowed by fog. Nathan was thinking about going home, about how his living room tree looked like it had been decorated by obligation rather than joy, about how Christmas music in empty houses sounded like it was mocking the furniture when his headlights swept across something pale on the roadside. At first it was just a smear of white against white, a shape that didn't belong, the kind of subtle wrongness a tired brain might ignore. But Nathan's eyes were trained for wrongness. He slowed. The cruiser's tires hissed over packed snow. He braked, pulled to the shoulder, and sat still for half a breath, staring through the windshield as if the road might explain itself. The shape remained. He turned on the spotlight, and the beam cut across the ditch like a searchlight across a battlefield. There, in the shallow dip beside the road, lay a German shepherd puppy, no more than 3 months old, small enough that her ears, still too large for her head, seemed like they had been borrowed from an older dog and forgotten there. Her coat, meant to be thick and proud, was dull and thinning in patches, the black and tan muted by grime and snow. Her ribs showed beneath the fur in a way that made Nathan's stomach tighten, sharp lines that spoke of days, not hours, of hunger. She was curled tight, paws tucked under her chest, tail wrapped close like a question mark that had run out of curiosity. Her eyes were open, but they held no shine, no spark of pleading. They were the eyes of a creature that had stopped bargaining. Beside her sat a plastic bowl half buried in snow. Nathan stepped out into the cold, boots crunching, and the air hit his face like a slap from an old friend who didn't believe in tenderness. The snowflakes clung to his lashes. He crouched at the edge of the ditch, careful not to slide, and saw the bowl more clearly. Inside, kibble filled it nearly to the top, frozen into a solid lump like pebbles trapped in ice. Someone had put food there, as if tossing a token would cleanse the guilt. Someone had left her anyway, as if the road could adopt her. Nathan's breath fogged in front of him. He spoke softly, the way you speak to something sacred or frightened. Sometimes they are the same thing. "Hey girl," he murmured. His voice had the scratch of a long day, but there was gentleness beneath it, a quiet warmth he didn't always know he still carried. The puppy didn't flinch. She didn't lift her head. No startled scramble, no fear response, no hopeful wag. Just stillness. That unnerved him more than a snarl would have. Fear meant life. Anger meant energy. This was neither. He shifted lower, letting his knees press into the snow until the cold seeped through his uniform pants, and he reached out slowly, palm down, giving her time to decide if his hand was danger. The puppy's nose twitched once, faint like a candle trying to stay lit in a draft. Her eyes moved slightly, barely tracking him, more like acknowledging the existence of motion than truly focusing. Nathan swallowed. He had seen people like this too, not just animals, the ones who had been shouted at, neglected, abandoned, until their minds decided the world wasn't worth reacting to anymore. He looked around, scanning the empty road, the snowbanks, the lines of pines that stood like dark witnesses. There were no tracks nearby, except the fresh dusting over older tire marks, no footsteps, no sign of the person who had done this. The only sound was the soft tick of snow against his jacket and the distant hum of the cruiser idling behind him like a patient beast. Nathan's radio crackled once with a routine update from dispatch, another unit clearing a traffic stop, and then went quiet again. In that quiet, he studied the puppy's face. Shepherd pups usually had a kind of alert mischief, as if they'd been born with opinions. This one looked emptied out. Her muzzle was thin, her whiskers damp, her lips slightly cracked from dehydration. The fur between her eyes was matted, and when a snowflake landed on her nose, she didn't even blink. Nathan felt something inside him shift, as if a door he'd kept shut for safety had been nudged open by a paw too small to carry blame. He thought of the frozen kibble in the bowl, of the half-hearted attempt at decency, and a bitter, almost humorous thought rose in him despite the ache. Humans loved shortcuts. Even their apologies came pre-packaged. He exhaled a short, humorless laugh that vanished immediately into the cold. "You deserve better than roadside catering," he muttered, the closest he came to swearing. Then his voice softened again, quieter, closer to the kind of sound his mother used to make at the piano when she wanted to coax a melody into being. "Hey, I'm here." He pulled off one glove and held his bare fingers near her cheek, not touching yet, letting warmth radiate. The puppy's ear flicked once, almost imperceptible, a tiny muscle remembering it had a job. Nathan took it as permission. He brushed his fingertips along the side of her neck, feather-light. Her skin was cold beneath the fur, and he could feel her heartbeat, faint but stubborn, like a distant drum. He didn't know her name. He didn't even know if she would live. But he knew with sudden clarity that hunger hadn't defeated her. Waiting had. Waiting for the person who left the bowl. Waiting for a car to stop. Waiting for mercy to show up, without demanding anything in return. Nathan rose carefully and walked back to the cruiser. He opened the back door and grabbed the thick wool blanket he kept there for stranded drivers, for kids in wrecks, for the kind of nights that went longer than they were supposed to. He also grabbed a small bottle of water from the front seat, the one he hadn't touched because coffee had been winning all day. He returned to the ditch and crouched again, spreading the blanket in the snow like a promise. "All right," he said softly, as if negotiating with fate. "We're going to do this the easy way." He slipped his arms under the puppy's body. She was shockingly light, lighter than she should have been, like she'd been made of bones and apologies. He expected resistance, even weak, but she yielded completely, limp with exhaustion, and that was the moment his throat tightened. He wrapped her in the blanket, tucking it around her ribs and paws, making a small cocoon of warmth. Then he held the water bottle near her mouth and tipped a few drops toward her lips. For a second, nothing happened. Then her tongue moved, one slow, tentative lick, as if testing whether the world still tasted real. Nathan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Good," he whispered, ridiculous praise for a single lick, but survival was built from ridiculous beginnings. He carried her to the cruiser with the careful steadiness of a man holding something breakable and holy. When he set her on the back seat, she didn't try to curl away. She simply lay there, eyes half open, watching the ceiling, as if she couldn't decide whether to believe this was happening. Nathan closed the door gently, like closing a church door during prayer. He slid into the driver's seat, radioed dispatch in a calm, professional tone that did not reveal the storm in his chest, and requested guidance for an emergency animal welfare pickup, noting the puppy's condition and the need for immediate care. He kept his words measured because that was what his job demanded, but his free hand hovered near the heater controls, turning them higher until warm air rushed into the cabin like a blessing finally remembered. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The puppy's eyes met his for a brief moment. Not hopeful, not afraid, just present. And that, Nathan realized, was the first crack in the stone. He put the cruiser in gear and eased back onto the road. Outside, snow kept falling, burying the ditch, softening the scene, erasing the evidence like the world wanted to pretend it hadn't happened. But the road still remembered, and now, so did he. The animal shelter on the east side of Redwood Hollow sat low against the wind, a practical building with beige siding and a roof that always seemed to carry more snow than it should, as if winter trusted it with extra weight. A single string of white lights traced the entrance, uneven but earnest, and a hand-painted sign near the door read, "Peace on Earth," the letters wobbling slightly as though hope itself had been written in a hurry. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant layered over pine cleaner, an attempt to balance sterility with season. It was warm, almost too warm after the cold, and the sudden contrast made Nathan Cole's fingers ache as circulation returned. He carried the puppy inside, wrapped in the wool blanket, her small body pressed against his chest like a fragile parcel the world had misaddressed. The front desk was staffed by a woman named Sarah Whitman, the shelter's evening coordinator, a woman in her early 50s with a tall, narrow frame and shoulders that curved forward not from weakness, but from years of leaning toward other people's problems. Sarah had graying auburn hair pulled into a low bun that never quite held, and wire-rimmed glasses that slid down her nose whenever she concentrated. Her face carried kindness in the practical sense, creases around her mouth from smiling at strangers who needed reassurance more than cheer. She spoke softly to everyone, animals included, but there was a firmness beneath it, shaped by a divorce long past and the quiet loss of a son who had moved across the country and never quite moved back emotionally. Volunteering had not softened Sarah. It had given her direction. When she saw Nathan step through the door with the bundle in his arms, she straightened immediately, all gentleness turning alert. "What have we got?" she asked, already moving around the desk. Nathan explained in clipped sentences, the way officers did when they were trying not to let feeling interfere with fact. Found on the North Service Road, approximately 3 months old, severe emaciation, minimal responsiveness, water accepted in small amounts. Sarah nodded, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Poor thing," she murmured, not as pity but as acknowledgement. She gestured him toward the exam room and called back for the vet on duty. Dr. Helen Moore emerged moments later from the back hallway, pulling on gloves as she walked. Helen was in her late 40s, average height, with cropped salt and pepper hair, and the steady gaze of someone who had learned to make peace with limits. Her face was plain in the honest way, but her hands moved with confidence, precise and calm. She had once wanted to be a surgeon in a big city hospital. Life, and an aging parent, had redirected her to Redwood Hollow. She did not regret it. "Animals," she said once, rarely lied about how they felt. She listened now as Nathan spoke, then carefully unwrapped the blanket and lifted the puppy onto the stainless steel table. The puppy did not resist. She did not whimper. Her limbs hung with the laxness of exhaustion rather than trust. Helen examined her slowly, checking gums, eyes, joints, listening to her heart. "No visible injuries," she said quietly. "No signs of infection, but she's severely dehydrated, prolonged starvation. Her system's been conserving energy for a while." Nathan watched every movement, his jaw tight, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets to keep from interfering. "She's not refusing food," Helen continued, glancing at him. "She's past the point of refusal. We call this shutdown." The word landed heavily, clinical and final sounding. Sarah folded her arms, lips pressed together. Nathan felt the room tilt slightly, not from dizziness, but from recognition. He had seen people like that on welfare checks, on hospital benches, on porches after long winters of disappointment. The body present. The will stepped away. They placed the puppy, temporarily tagged as found shepherd pup, female, in a quiet kennel, away from the barking, away from the bright lights. Volunteers moved through the shelter, hanging paper snowflakes and red bows on kennel doors, their voices low, careful not to startle the fragile calm. One volunteer, a college student home for break named Lucas, waved at Nathan with the shy respect reserved for uniforms and authority figures. Lucas was all limbs and optimism, cheeks flushed from the cold, unaware yet of how much the world could take. Nathan nodded back, then took a seat on the concrete floor outside the kennel, his back against the wall. He told himself he was staying to observe, to ensure protocol was followed, to finish paperwork if needed. Hours passed. The shelter's rhythm continued around him, phones ringing, doors opening, the occasional bark rising and falling like a question nobody answered. The puppy did not bark. She did not lift her head when food was slid gently into the kennel. She lay curled on the blanket Sarah had tucked beneath her, eyes open but unfocused. As evening deepened, the shelter quieted. Volunteers said their goodbyes, wished each other Merry Christmas with subdued smiles, and the lights dimmed to a softer glow. Sarah made her rounds, pausing by Nathan. "You can go home, officer," she said kindly. "We'll keep a close watch." Nathan nodded, but he did not stand. "I'll sit a bit longer," he replied. Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right," she said. "Call if you need anything." When the building settled into near silence, the hum of the heating system filling the gaps, Nathan shifted closer to the kennel. He did not know what he was doing. He only knew that stillness sometimes required an answer. He rested his forearms on his knees and began to hum. It wasn't a Christmas carol. It was something older, simpler, a melody without words, uneven in places, the kind that wandered and found its way back again. His mother used to hum it while cooking, while folding laundry, while snow pressed against their old windows like a listener trying to hear. The sound wavered at first. Nathan's throat tightened, unused to this kind of vulnerability in public spaces. He almost stopped. Then he noticed the puppy's ear move, just once, a small twitch, barely there, but real. Nathan held his breath. The puppy's eyes shifted slightly, not toward the food, not toward the door, but toward him. The humming faltered. The moment stretched, fragile as glass. When he stopped, the puppy's attention drifted again, her gaze clouding. Nathan swallowed and resumed the tune, steadier now, less self-conscious. He let it be imperfect. He let it be human. This time, she stayed with him. Her breathing, shallow and irregular before, evened out just enough to notice. The night deepened. Nathan remained seated, humming until his voice grew hoarse, then softer, then barely audible. Eventually, he stood, joints stiff, and approached the kennel. He crouched close enough that the puppy could see his face clearly. "You don't have to do anything," he said quietly. "Just stay." Her eyes met his again, no spark yet, but presence. That felt like a beginning. When morning came, it arrived with frost and the distant sound of church bells, practicing for Christmas Day. Nathan returned before his shift, coffee untouched in his cup. Sarah greeted him with a tired smile. "She made it through the night," she said. "No worse, no better." Nathan nodded, relief and worry tangling together. He sat again by the kennel and hummed. The puppy turned her head toward him, not toward the food bowl that had been refreshed and softened with warm water, toward him. "She needs consistency," Sarah said gently, crouching beside him. "And time we may not have. The shelter's full. Holidays stretch everything thin." Nathan stared at the puppy, at the way her tail lay limp, at the faint rise and fall of her ribs. "If she's going to stay," he said quietly, more to himself than to Sarah, "she deserves a name." He waited a moment, as if listening for permission, then spoke it softly. "Noelle." The puppy's tail moved, barely, but unmistakably. Sarah's eyes shone. "All right," she said, exhaling. "Let's see what we can do." Because the shelter was full, because Christmas strained every system, and because sometimes mercy arrived disguised as paperwork, they approved a temporary emergency foster, strict conditions, daily check-ins, no promises. Nathan signed without ceremony, his name steady on the line. He drove home slowly, snow whispering across the windshield. Noelle wrapped in blankets beside him, like something borrowed from fate, something he was afraid to breathe on too hard. The road disappeared behind them, but the song stayed. Morning came to Redwood Hollow the way it often did in late December, quiet, pale, and patient, as if the town itself were holding its breath between snowfalls. Frost stitched delicate veins along the shelter windows, and somewhere beyond the pines a church bell practiced a hesitant toll, each note drifting through the cold air like a question sent ahead of the day. The animal shelter stirred awake, not with excitement, but with duty. Heat hummed through the vents. Lights flickered on one row at a time. Christmas Eve had passed, leaving behind a tired hope and a long list of needs. Nathan Cole arrived early, before his shift, before the town fully remembered it was alive. He had slept little. When he did sleep, he dreamed of sound, unfinished melodies looping without resolution, like a sentence that refused to end. He stepped inside with a paper cup of coffee he barely touched, his shoulders still carrying the cold from outside. In daylight, the shelter looked smaller, more honest. No shadows to hide behind. Just kennels, clipboards, and people trying to do too much with too little. Sarah Whitman was already there, cardigan buttoned crookedly, glasses perched low. She greeted Nathan with a nod that held both greeting and concern. "She's stable," Sarah said quietly, leading him down the corridor. "No dramatic changes overnight, which, right now, counts as good news." Nathan followed, his boots echoing softly on the concrete. He stopped in front of the kennel before Sarah finished speaking. The puppy lay on her side, blanket tucked around her small body. In the light, she looked even younger, ears still unsure of themselves, paws oversized and awkward, as if she had not yet grown into the world that demanded so much from her. Her fur, though dull, held the promise of richness once nourishment returned. Her eyes tracked Nathan as he crouched. "That's new," Sarah said, noticing. "She didn't do that yesterday." Nathan's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, and hummed again. Same tune, same gentle rhythm. He didn't push it louder this time. He let it exist in the space like breath. The puppy's head lifted a fraction. She did not rise. But she listened. Dr. Helen Moore entered quietly, clipboard in hand. She observed for a moment without interrupting. Her vitals held steady, she said at last, still critical, but not declining. Helen crouched to examine the puppy again, her movements deliberate, respectful. "You've given her a pattern," she added, glancing at Nathan. "That matters, especially for animals like this." "What do you mean like this?" Nathan asked. Helen hesitated, choosing her words. "The ones who weren't just neglected," she said. "The ones who were waited out. There's a difference." Nathan nodded. He understood more than he wanted to admit. A volunteer passed by with a cart of supplies. Emily Hart, mid-20s, round-faced, hair tucked into a knit cap despite being indoors. Emily was cheerful by nature, but today her smile was subdued. She paused when she saw Nathan. "She's the roadside pup, right?" she asked softly. "I heard about her." Nathan nodded again. Emily crouched beside the kennel, careful to keep her distance. "She's beautiful," she said, as if stating a fact rather than offering hope. "She just looks tired." "That's because she is," Sarah replied gently, "in ways sleep doesn't fix." As the morning wore on, the shelter filled with sound, phones ringing, doors opening, the low murmur of conversations layered with concern. Nathan stayed where he was. He did not check his watch. He did not rush the moment. When Sarah returned with paperwork tucked under her arm, her expression was practical but kind. "We've talked it through," she said. "Christmas has us over capacity. Fosters are stretched thin. But given your involvement and the fact that she's responding to you specifically, we're approving an emergency temporary foster." Nathan looked up sharply. "I work full-time," he said. "Long shifts." "We know," Sarah replied. "That's why there are conditions, daily check-ins, scheduled feeding protocols, immediate return if her condition worsens." She met his eyes. "No room for improvisation?" Nathan didn't hesitate. "I can do that." Sarah slid the clipboard toward him. "Sign here." He did, his signature steady. No flourish, no ceremony. Just a name placed where commitment lived. As if sensing the shift in air, the puppy stirred. Nathan turned back to her. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "If you're coming with me," he said, "you should have something better than a tag number." Sarah smiled faintly. "Careful," she warned. "Names carry expectations." Nathan considered this. He watched the puppy's chest rise and fall, watched her eyes follow him, slow but present. "Noelle," he said at last, softly. The name held the season without pressing it too hard. A name that suggested light without demanding cheer. A name that left room for quiet survival. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Noelle's tail moved. It was barely there, just a small, uncertain sweep against the blanket. But it was movement chosen, not reflex. Sarah's breath caught. Emily pressed a hand to her mouth. Even Helen looked up from her notes. "Well," Helen said quietly, "that answers that." The process of leaving took longer than Nathan expected. Instructions were reviewed twice, feeding schedules discussed in precise increments, warnings issued about refeeding syndrome and signs of distress. Nathan listened closely, committing each detail to memory, with the seriousness of a man who knew lives were made of small margins. Noelle was wrapped again, her blanket tucked carefully. A heat pack placed near, but not against her body. When Nathan carried her out, the cold hit harder than before. Snow had begun again, fine, steady, relentless. He settled her into the back seat of the cruiser, securing her with the kind of care usually reserved for children. She did not resist. She watched him with eyes that no longer drifted away when he spoke. The drive home was slow. Nathan avoided main roads, took the long way through neighborhoods strung with lights and quiet porches. He spoke to Noelle occasionally, not expecting response, just filling the space. He told her about the house, small, warm, quiet. He told her there was no rush, that she could take her time. At a red light, he glanced back. Noelle's eyes were closed now, her breathing shallow but even. For the first time since he'd found her, she slept. Nathan let the light turn green twice before moving. Somewhere behind them, the shelter settled back into its routines. Somewhere ahead, a house waited with an upright piano and a silence that had gone unchallenged for too long. Between those two places traveled a fragile agreement. Not yet hope, not yet healing, but the beginning of something that had a name. Outside, the road disappeared under fresh snow. Inside the car, the song did not play, but it was remembered. Nathan Cole's house sat on the quieter side of Redwood Hollow, a modest one-story place built decades ago, when the town still believed permanence was a reasonable expectation. Snow gathered politely along the roofline and porch rail, never dramatic, just present, like a guest who knew better than to demand attention. A single strand of warm white lights framed the front window, plugged in more out of habit than celebration. Inside, the house waited in a way only empty homes did. Not lonely exactly, but alert, as if listening for footsteps it remembered. Nathan carried Noelle inside carefully, the cold clinging to his jacket as the door closed behind them. Warm air wrapped around them immediately, carrying the faint scent of pine from an old candle burning on the kitchen counter. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if sudden motions might frighten the walls themselves. Noelle stirred slightly in his arms, her small body still light enough to make his chest tighten. He set her down on a thick blanket near the heater vent in the living room, choosing the spot where warmth spread evenly without blowing directly on her. The blanket was old, frayed at the edges, once used by his mother for picnics that never seemed to happen anymore. He hadn't thrown it away. He never did. The living room was simple, a worn couch in muted gray, a coffee table scarred by years of use, family photos turned slightly toward the wall, not hidden but no longer centered, and in the corner, half shadowed by the Christmas tree lights, stood the upright piano. It was an old instrument, dark wood polished thin by time, and hands that had loved it often. The bench was scuffed where shoes had rested, and a small chip marked the lower edge where a vacuum cleaner had once lost a battle. Nathan hadn't touched it since the funeral, not because he disliked music, but because the piano still remembered his mother too clearly. She had been a small woman with capable hands, quick to laugh, quicker to hum. When winters were heavy, she played. When money was tight, she played. When Nathan was a boy and the world seemed larger than he knew how to face, she played and told him, without words, that sound could carry weight when people could not. Now the piano stood quiet, its silence thick, almost physical. Nathan removed his jacket, hung it by the door, and knelt beside Noelle. Up close, the signs of neglect were impossible to ignore, the hollow at her hips, the way her skin clung too tightly to bone, the faint tremor that moved through her legs when she shifted. Her eyes were open, watching him, not fearful but cautious, as if she were observing a test she did not yet know the rules to. He placed a shallow bowl of softened food nearby, carefully measured as instructed. He did not push it closer. He did not coax. He sat on the floor beside her instead. "All right," he said quietly, voice low and even. "No pressure?" The house made small noises around them, pipes, adjusting, the heater clicking on and off. Outside, a car passed somewhere distant, tires hissing through snow. Noelle's breathing was shallow but steady. She did not move toward the bowl. She did not turn away from it either. She simply lay there, suspended between options. Nathan began to hum. The sound filled the room gently, threading through the furniture, brushing against the corners where dust gathered. It was the same tune as before, the one that came uninvited when words failed. His voice was rough at first, unused to carrying melody without accompaniment. Noelle's ears shifted, her eyes softened just a fraction. Nathan kept humming, not watching her directly, letting the sound exist without expectation. Minutes passed. Noelle's breathing eased. The tension in her shoulders loosened slightly, like a knot testing whether it was safe to untie itself. Nathan stopped humming and waited. The silence returned quickly, heavier than before. Noelle's eyes dulled again, her focus drifting. Nathan exhaled slowly. He looked at the piano. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then he stood, joints stiff, and crossed the room. Each step felt louder than it should have, as if the house were warning him. He lifted the fallboard, exposing the keys. Ivory and yellowed white stared back at him, familiar and accusing. He sat on the bench, his weight settling into grooves worn by years of repetition. The first note was wrong, sharp, uncertain, like a question asked too loudly. Nathan winced, fingers hovering above the keys. He almost stood up again. Then he tried another note, softer, then another. The melody came back slowly, not in full sentences, but in fragments. His hands remembered even when his mind hesitated. The tune wove itself together, uneven but sincere, filling the space with something that had been missing longer than he cared to count. Behind him, Noelle lifted her head. The sound moved through the room differently than his humming had. It vibrated through the floor, through the legs of the table, through the blanket beneath her body. Noelle's ears rose higher now, alert but not alarmed. She shifted, dragging herself forward an inch. Her movement was clumsy, uncoordinated, but intentional. Nathan did not turn around. He played. The notes smoothed out, finding confidence. He let the tempo remain slow, patient. Snow tapped against the window in quiet applause. The Christmas tree lights flickered gently, casting warm reflections across the piano's surface. Nathan's shoulders loosened as the melody carried him somewhere safer. Somewhere sound could say what he could not. Behind him came a faint sound, not a bark, not a whine. The soft scrape of a bowl nudged slightly across the floor. Nathan's fingers faltered for a split second, then continued. He did not look. He did not rush the moment by acknowledging it too quickly. He let the music do what it was doing. A second sound followed, subtle, deliberate. The quiet click of teeth against softened food. Nathan's chest tightened so suddenly he almost lost his breath. Tears blurred the keys, turning them into streaks of light. He swallowed hard and kept playing, hands trembling just enough to remind him he was still human. Noelle ate slowly, carefully. Each bite was small, cautious, as if she were testing whether the world would take the food away if she committed too much hope to it. But she ate. Her body leaned forward, her balance shaky, but determined. The bowl shifted again, this time with purpose. When the bowl was empty, Noelle sat back down heavily, exhausted by the effort. She did not collapse. She did not retreat. She simply rested, breathing a little deeper than before. Nathan finished the song. The final note lingered in the air, warm and complete. He let his hands rest on the keys, eyes closed. When he finally turned around, Noelle was watching him. Her eyes were different now, still tired, still fragile, but present. Awake in a way that went beyond muscle and bone. Nathan laughed softly, a sound that surprised him with its ease. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood, crossing the room slowly. He knelt beside her again, offering his palm. Noelle sniffed, then pressed her nose into his hand briefly, a touch so light it could have been imagined. "You did good," he whispered, absurd praise for survival, but survival deserved celebration. That night, Nathan did not sleep much. He lay on the couch, one arm hanging toward the floor, where Noelle slept curled in her blanket. He woke often, listening for changes in her breathing, checking the rise and fall of her chest. Each time, it remained steady. Outside, snow covered the road completely, smoothing away the place where Noelle had once been left to wait. Inside, music lingered in the air, settling into the walls like a promise kept. The piano was no longer silent, and neither was the house. Progress did not announce itself with confidence. It arrived in increments so small they could be mistaken for coincidence. Some mornings, Noelle ate half the portion measured carefully the night before. Other mornings, she sniffed the bowl, turned her head, and lay back down as if even the act of choosing felt too heavy. Nathan learned quickly that recovery did not move in straight lines. It looped, hesitated, doubled back, and occasionally stalled altogether. He adjusted his schedule without telling anyone at first. Overtime, shifts were declined. Paperwork was finished early or late, whenever it could be made to fit around feeding windows and observation notes. The house adapted, quietly. The piano bench stayed pulled out. The blanket near the heater remained Noelle's island. Nathan spoke less on the phone, more to the room. He hummed while making coffee. He played in short sessions, careful not to overwhelm her fragile system with stimulation or sound. When he left for work, he left recordings playing softly from his phone, simple melodies, steady rhythms, placed near where Noelle rested, not loud enough to demand attention, only enough to exist. Some days it worked. Noelle ate while he was gone, small signs left behind like proof of life. An empty bowl, a smear of food at the rim. Paw prints shifted slightly from where he'd left them. On those evenings, Nathan allowed himself a quiet relief. Other days, he came home to untouched food, and the familiar tightness returned to his chest. The vet's warnings echoed in his mind. Refeeding syndrome, electrolyte imbalance. the body's quiet rebellion after prolonged deprivation. Too much, too fast could kill her. Too little, too slow might not save her. It was a balance measured in grams, minutes, patience. The collapse happened on a morning that seemed ordinary enough to trust. Snow had stopped overnight, leaving the town under a pale sky that looked undecided about brightness. Nathan had finished playing and stood to prepare the morning feeding. He turned back just in time to see Noelle attempt to rise and fail. Her legs folded beneath her without warning, her body tipping sideways onto the blanket with a dull, breathless thud. "Noelle!" he said sharply, already moving. Her breathing changed immediately, becoming shallow, uneven. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. Nathan dropped to his knees, hands hovering for a fraction of a second as training and fear collided. He checked her gums, pale, too pale. He called her name again, softer now, uselessly pleading. The drive to the emergency clinic felt longer than it was. Snow blurred past the windows as Nathan gripped the steering wheel, one hand reaching back to steady Noelle's bundled body on the seat. He spoke constantly, not to calm her, he wasn't sure she could hear, but to anchor himself. He told her where they were going. He told her to stay. He told her he was there. The clinic lights were too bright, the air too sharp. The smell of antiseptic hit him immediately, clean and unforgiving. A technician met him at the door, efficient, composed, already lifting Noelle from his arms with practiced care. Nathan followed, boots skidding slightly on the tile, his breath loud in his ears. Machines hummed around her crate, cold and precise. Lines were placed. Numbers appeared on monitors that Nathan pretended to understand. Dr. Helen Moore arrived moments later, coat half-buttoned, eyes already assessing. "She crashed," Helen said simply after examining Noelle. "Not unexpected, but not good." Nathan nodded, absorbing the words without fully feeling them yet. He crouched beside the crate, close enough to see Noelle's chest struggle for rhythm. "She's fighting the consequences of starvation now," Helen continued quietly. "Her body doesn't trust the intake. We have to go slow, slower than feels reasonable." "What can I do?" Nathan asked. Helen hesitated. "Stay," she said at last. "Be what she recognizes." Nathan did not leave the crate. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, legs drawn up awkwardly. The clinic bustled around him, phones ringing, doors opening, voices rising and falling, but his world narrowed to the space between his chest and the crate door. He began to sing, not humming this time, singing. His voice was rough, unpolished, breaking slightly on certain notes. He didn't care. He sang the melody his mother used to play when storms knocked the power out and the house went dark. He sang the tune that had no words because words were unnecessary weight. Noelle's breathing did not improve immediately. The monitor numbers wavered, stubborn and indifferent to sentiment. Nathan sang anyway, his voice steadying as his body remembered the shape of the sound. When his throat gave out, he stopped and reached for his phone. His hand shook slightly as he cued a recording, one he'd made at home without thinking. Piano keys softer than usual, the melody familiar and imperfect. He placed the phone near the crate, volume low, just enough to carry. Helen knelt beside him with a small syringe filled with nutrient paste, diluted carefully. "We're going to try this," she said. "Tiny amounts. If she accepts it, it's a good sign." Nathan nodded. He took the syringe from her, his grip careful. He opened the crate just enough to reach in, dipping the tip gently to Noelle's lips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Noelle's tongue moved, just once. The sound was almost inaudible, the smallest possible affirmation. Nathan's breath caught sharply. He waited, resisting the urge to do more, to rush the moment. A second lick followed. The monitor steadied slightly, numbers adjusting, not dramatically, but enough to notice. Helen met Nathan's eyes and gave a small nod. "Good," she said quietly. "That's good." They repeated the process over the next hour. Song, silence, paced, rest, each. Cycle measured, restrained, respectful of the fragile line Noelle walked. Nathan stayed seated on the floor, singing when his voice allowed, letting the recording fill in when it didn't. He did not look at the clock. He did not think ahead. He existed entirely in the present tense. Sometimes survival begins with something so small, it can be missed by anyone not listening. By late afternoon, Noelle's breathing was steadier, Exhaustion still weighed heavily on her body, but the sharp edge of crisis dulled slightly. Helen straightened, rolling her shoulders. "She's not out of danger," she said, but she pulled back. Nathan closed his eyes briefly, relief washing through him in a wave that left him lightheaded. He pressed his forehead against his knees, letting the feeling pass without indulging it too much. "You did what you could," Helen added. "That mattered." They allowed Noelle to rest in the clinic overnight for monitoring. Nathan left reluctantly, standing at the door longer than necessary. He placed his phone near the crate before going, the recording cued, looping quietly. "I'll be back in the morning," he told her, voice low. "I promise." At home, the house felt wrong without her. The blanket lay empty near the heater. The piano bench sat pushed back in shadow. Nathan did not play that night. He sat on the couch instead, hands clasped, listening to the quiet that no longer felt neutral. Snow began again sometime after midnight. When Nathan returned at dawn, Helen met him with a tired smile. "She ate," she said. "Just a little, on her own." Nathan let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. He moved to the crate and knelt. Noelle's eyes opened, finding him immediately. She did not lift her head. She did not need to. The thread had nearly broken, but it held. Christmas morning arrived without ceremony, the way healing often did, clean, pale, and unannounced. Snow lay smooth across Redwood Hollow, untouched except for a few early tire tracks, and the delicate signatures of birds that had hopped, paused, and decided the day was safe enough to begin. The sky carried a soft brightness, not the sharp blue of celebration, but the gentler hue of forgiveness, as if the world had decided to start again without insisting anyone apologize first. Nathan Cole woke before the alarm. He lay still for a moment on the couch, listening. The house had changed in subtle ways over the past few days. It no longer sounded hollow. Pipes whispered less. Floors creaked with purpose. Even the quiet felt occupied. He rose carefully, joints stiff, and crossed the living room toward the place where Noelle slept. She was awake. Noelle lay on her blanket near the heater, head lifted, eyes alert in a way that would have been impossible a week earlier. Her body was still thin, her movements measured, but there was a steadiness to her posture now, a readiness that suggested the world was once again worth tracking. Her ears rose when she saw him. Her tail did not thump yet, but it shifted, deliberate and awake. "Morning," Nathan said softly, as if the day itself might be startled by enthusiasm. He checked her breathing, her temperature, the color of her gums, moving through the routine with the quiet competence he had developed through repetition and worry. Everything was imperfect, but acceptable. He exhaled slowly and stood, moving toward the piano. The tree lights were still on, warm and patient, casting a soft glow across the room. Nathan sat at the bench and placed his hands on the keys. He did not hesitate this time. The melody began immediately, smooth and confident, shaped by days of repetition and nights of fear. The piano responded as if relieved to be needed again, its voice fuller than before. Behind him, Noelle shifted. Nathan played on, not watching, not rushing the moment by turning it into proof. The notes carried through the room, steady and kind. Snow slid gently from the roof outside with a whispering hush. A sound came from behind him, the scrape of claws against the floor. Nathan's fingers trembled but did not stop. He kept the tempo slow, generous. He felt rather than saw Noelle stand, her legs bracing, correcting, choosing balance over collapse. She walked, unsteady but determined, each step an argument against the past. The bowl waited where it always did. Noelle reached it and lowered her head. She ate, not cautiously this time, not as if testing the mercy of the room. She ate like a dog who finally remembered why living mattered. The sound of it, soft, earnest, unmistakably alive, filled the space behind Nathan like a second melody. When the bowl was empty, Noelle barked. It was not loud. It was not demanding. Just a single clear sound that said, "I am here, and I noticed when you stopped." Nathan laughed, the sound breaking out of him before he could shape it into anything dignified. Tears blurred the keys, turning ivory into light. He finished the song with shaking hands and turned slowly. Noelle stood there, tail swaying now with careful confidence, eyes bright and fixed on him. "Well," he said hoarsely, "I suppose that's fair." They spent the morning quietly. Nathan made coffee he actually drank. He prepared another small meal, watched Noelle eat it without hesitation, and sat on the floor beside her afterward, his back against the couch. He told her about nothing in particular, the way people did when they finally believed they would be heard. He spoke about his mother's piano, about the road, about how some things broke not because they were weak, but because they waited too long without being answered. Later, he drove back to the shelter. Noelle bundled beside him, posture steadier than before. Sarah Whitman met them at the door, her glasses fogging slightly from the temperature change. She took one look at Noelle, standing, alert, leaning gently against Nathan's leg, and pressed a hand to her chest. "Well," she said softly, "would you look at that?" Dr. Helen Moore reviewed the latest notes, examined Noelle carefully, and nodded. "She's not fixed," she said, "but she's found her direction." Nathan signed the adoption papers that afternoon, not because it felt triumphant, but because it felt inevitable. He adjusted his shifts, declined overtime, learned the vocabulary of feeding schedules and follow-up visits. He built his days around the quiet needs of a dog who had taught him how fragile listening could be. Some rescues didn't end at the shelter door. They ended when a quiet house learned how to breathe again. That night, as snow fell once more over Redwood Hollow, Nathan played the piano with the windows dark and the lights low. Noelle slept nearby, belly full, chest rising and falling, in a rhythm that matched the room. Outside, the old road lay buried beneath fresh snow, but the song was finished now, and it had been finished properly. Sometimes the miracle does not arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes God sends it quietly, through a song remembered, through a hand that stops the car, through a heart that chooses not to walk away. This story reminds us that life does not always ask for strength. Sometimes it only asks for presence, to stay when it would be easier to leave, to listen when silence feels heavy, to give patience when nothing seems to change. In our daily lives, we all meet moments like this. A person who has stopped asking, a family member who feels forgotten, a quiet soul waiting for someone to notice. God often works through ordinary people who simply choose compassion. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. And if you believe in second chances and quiet miracles, please subscribe and support our YouTube channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of faith, love, and redemption. May God bless you and your family. May He protect you through every season of life. If you believe in this message, please comment Amen below.